What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and in this video I wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind for a long time, and that is the misconception around optimal DPS. I, like probably all of my viewers, am a big fan of the creators Aegis and Llama. They put out awesome content, and the amount of time and testing they put in to figure out the best damage rotations for certain bosses and raid encounters is really cool. Aegis has an entire spreadsheet breaking down basically every DPS rotation imaginable. From simply holding left click with Thunderlord to pulling off insane Billy damage rotations that only the most skilled players can pull off, he documents it all for the community to use and learn from. But in this video, I want to give a different perspective on boss DPS. I wanted to make this video before Final Shape launched, as I thought it might help some teams in the day 1 raid, but sadly I didn't get time to make it. But after getting some comments on some YouTube videos recently, I figured it was still worth making the video. I've touched on this topic in various videos in the past, but today I'm making a video dedicated to it. And that is that you do not need the quote-unquote optimal DPS in Destiny. As I said, I've wanted to make this video for a long time, but this tweet was so on point. Evan F 1997 asked in a tweet for some advice for day 1 raiders, and ATP, aka all the players, replied with this: "Stop trying to do Aegis DPS rotations during day 1 boss fights, because most of the time holding left or right click depending on your handedness with Thunderlord, a random sword, or just spamming rockets will be fine." And this was genuinely the best piece of advice I think someone could have given. And if you don't know ATP, then go subscribe to his channel. His team finished 3rd in the Salvation's Edge raid race, and he has consistently been a high place finisher in day 1s, and he is by far one of the most talented players in Destiny 2. I subscribed to his channel way back in the day when he was doing fast solo lost sectors, because I too was doing those back in the Beyond Light days, but he is a far better player than I am and makes soloing GMs look incredibly easy. So for real, go follow and subscribe and all that stuff. Anyways, that brings me back to the point of this video, and that's that you don't need optimal DPS to be even the hardest of challenges like a day 1 raid. My team and I cleared Vow of the Disciple on contests, and our strat was simply a Divinity and Sleeper Simulants. Then fast forward over 2 years, we were on Nezarec and Pantheon at -20, and what got us our clear again? Sleeper and Div. I also used Sleeper and Div on Ute in day 1 and Crota's End. I chose Sleeper because of the artifact mod Monochromatic Maestro, but the rest of my team and many other teams used Leviathan's Breath, and both weapons cooked incredibly hard. But you know what is most important about these strats? They are consistent. Divinity gives you very easy consistency for damage, and Sleeper and Levy's Breath can both very easily be hip-fired. You literally just hold left click. And I think on day 1 on Ute, we even got a 2-phase. On Crota, Lament was king. The best players in the world like Giggs were beating him with Legend of Acreus, but if you're not familiar with Acreus, then you won't get optimal damage out of it. Not that it's super hard to use or anything, but if you don't know about the reload damage and meleeing every 3rd shot for Trench Barrel, then a day 1 raid is not the time to be learning something new. Go with what you know. Again, on day 1 of Salvation's Edge, I busted out my old Falling Guillotine with Relentless Strikes and Whirlwind Blade. I was originally using Frenzy and Bait and Switch, and while those perks aren't that difficult to proc, it's still just way easier to use Whirlwind Blade and just keep clicking left click. My friend Ark was using the OG roll before me, and he was out damaging me, so the results speak for themselves. So myself and my other teammates made the switch, and we beat the Herald of Finality. The point of me saying all this is that for the vast majority of players, consistent and easy DPS will be far better to use than optimal speedrunning damage rotations. I love watching raid speedruns from guys like Sickrobes and Aegis, and hell, I was even watching Silumar back in the Leviathan days. I'm a student of the game. I love seeing what works optimally, but I also understand that you need full team coordination to make those damage strategies work. And if you have just one weak link where someone doesn't do their job, then the whole damage phase could fall apart. With social media, we say we are comparing our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reels. Well, you only see the highlight reels on YouTube. These people doing speedruns put in hundreds of hours of practice to get that one perfect run where all the stars align and they get a world record time. I love the dedication and the theory crafting that goes on to get to that level, but to achieve that you need tons of practice. And the vast majority of Destiny players don't even raid. And if they do raid, they are probably just doing it for loot and a clear. So to try and copy the best players in the world is foolish. One reason the Still Hunt damage rotation has become so popular is A, it is quite easy to pull off, and B, the Witness needs long-range weapons like a sniper. It wouldn't be nearly as popular right now if the raid boss was Crota. And even Crota, the meta went from Lament to Bequest with Surrounded. But if your team can't reliably keep enemies up to allow you to have Surrounded procced, then your damage will fall apart. Again, there is setups going on with some of these damage rotations that you may not be aware of. So when you attempt this fancy ass damage rotation and deal shit damage, you don't even know why it isn't working. I've been running Warlord's Ruins the past 2 weeks for Pinnacles, and I just use LFG a lot of the time, and I'm consistently putting up the highest damage on the bosses, and I'm using simple things like a bait and switch GL dump with Strand or Void Surge, or when it was Solar Surge, I used freaking Cry Mutiny. It has Demo and Vorpal, and now with boss specs gone, you can run backup mag. I would pair it with Still Hunt, and even just on a Warlock with no Celestial, I was pumping out great damage. Why? Because it's extremely easy. What is easier than unloading a bunch of GLs into a giant boss and then reloading and doing it again? I know on a heavy, Vorpal weapon is only a 10% damage buff, but those Warlord's Ruin bosses in second and third encounter have long damage phases, so you can't reliably make orbs for explosive light. And bait and switch is not that hard to proc, but again, it's easier to just simply shoot a GL. So over the course of a bunch of damage phases, Vorpal is looking pretty good all of a sudden because it's extremely consistent. The Ogre boss can push you, so Leviathan's Breath is sometimes hard to hit crits on, and if you miss a crit, Levy's DPS falls off greatly. And you need a Void Loader mod on as well to get the most out of it. And in the lead up to damage, you can just use a few GL shots to take out the Scorn guy that spawns the totem. They are fairly beefy, but the GL deletes them quickly. And that is another underrated thing. These optimal DPS rotations you are seeing, they have loadout swaps and people are often running double special. In a day 1 raid, in most cases you need a primary. With rocket sidearms now in the game, you could argue you could run a couple of those, which I did do in Salvation's Edge raid, but the point I'm making is you often want a well-rounded loadout for even getting to damage phase, and that is definitely something that you want to consider. I love explosive light GLs for quick burst damage, but if you die, then you lose your explosive light shots and suddenly you're fucked. I was running an explosive light rocket launcher in -20 Pantheon on the planet's boss, and I was finding my damage was kind of shit. I can't even remember what I ended up swapping to, but I know when I swapped, my damage was way better. Because sometimes I wasn't able to find orbs, or I would die to the fire on the plate, or whatever other thing that you can die to, and then you just have no explosive light shots. And in Warlord's Ruin on the final boss, sometimes things get very hectic, with the Scions and the boss all shooting you while you're trying to deal damage. So it can be very hard to get an optimal damage phase off sometimes, but with a GL like Cry Mutiny, all you have to do is focus on hitting the boss. You don't even have to hit crits. So if you're using an ease of use damage strategy, you will often out damage your teammate with more quote unquote optimal loadouts simply because you're consistent, where they may fuck up a rotation 1 or 2 times. So in one phase they might get it right and out damage you, but through the course of an entire encounter, you end up with more damage. One more thing that I wanted to highlight was on my subclass tier list video, I had various people crying about my low placement of Stasis Hunter. Trust me, I'm well aware of the DPS rotations with Whisper of Impetus. Again, I like watching people like Chicken SI2 do insane things in Destiny, but being able to put out huge damage in one very niche, curated damage rotation does not make a subclass or a fragment strong as a whole, and a lot of people lose sight of that. No one was running Stasis Hunter on day 1 for Salvation's Edge. Granted, Lucky Pants were disabled, but even still, Celestial Nighthawk is just a far more reliable and easy to use super. And speaking of that, Behemoth Titan Stasis Super deals a shit ton of damage, but it is not super high DPS. It is a long super, and you need a big boss for all the crystals to shatter on it, and you need Syntheseps with enemies around to get the most out of it. So also understand the difference between total damage and DPS, please. Celestial is so great because you can pre-pop it and you only have to land 1 crit and then you can just start dealing damage with your other weapons. Those Whisper of Impetus damage rotations are niche for a reason, because they are inaccessible to the broader population. Anyways, I could keep going on with numerous examples of how consistent DPS is far more important than optimal DPS that you can hit only 10% of the time when all the stars align. If you are a top tier player who uses these strats, then this obviously doesn't apply to you. You are out there discovering and mastering these rotations, and I think that's great and a lot of fun to watch. But I wanted to make this video because as cool as I think those optimal DPS rotations are, I need people to understand that it is not optimal for the vast majority of players, and most who try to emulate that will end up just dealing far less damage than someone who uses a simple but effective, and most importantly, consistent damage rotation. I play a lot of Destiny, and I know that the game often does silly shit that you can't predict, and it can throw things off and mess up your whole damage rotation, or whatever it is that you're trying to do. I see it all the time when I solo GMs. Things seldom go to plan. So just try to remember that the next time you're copying something some YouTuber said is the best. Anyways, that's my rant for the day. I hope you understand the point I'm trying to make with this video. Again, I'm not trying to disparage any of the content creators who put out videos on what is the best damage or anything like that. I want their audiences to understand that while it may be optimal, it is not always practical. And if any speedrunners happen to see this video, please comment down below how much time and practice it takes for you to get one of those god runs that makes it up on YouTube. I'm curious myself. Anyways, that's it for the video. I hope it was helpful and informative, and if it was, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. And if you're still watching, then you're awesome. Thanks for watching to the end. Happy damage dealing, and take care.